All right, so we have a special guest with us today. It's Arnold. He's the best practice chair for San Francisco. So Carl, thank you for taking the time.
Hey, my pleasure. It's great to be here with you.
Right. So we did get a couple of questions in between the podcast here. So some people have no idea what Vistage is, so we might have to explain a little bit here and there. Like I remember hearing the first time I heard the title chair, and the guy who said it would turn to me and said it. And one day I might be promoted to credenza. You know.
Wow. Yeah, or couch or bed or something. Yeah, interesting. Vistage is, it's a worldwide organization now. We have 45,000 members across 25 countries. So it's a worldwide organization. Our mission is to enhance the lives of business leaders. So we have a variety of different leadership offerings, from people just starting out in business, emerging leaders, advancing leaders, all the way up to key executives and CEOs. And interestingly, I was a member of Vistage, and I mentioned 45,000. It's really broken up into little groups of 12 to 16 people in each group, and each group has a chair, which is what I am, and we're basically the organizer and the facilitator and the leader of the group, and we make sure that we keep the groups full and keep bringing great information to the group to work with and facilitate, because the group is a peer group of businesses, all different kinds of businesses. So it's not really like a trade organization where everybody's in the same business. Everybody's in different businesses. In fact, we don't want two of the same, because we want people to share and be open. And you don't want to necessarily do that with your competitor. So at any rate, it's made up of these little groups. There's of about 12 to 16 people. I was a member. I was in the hotel business years ago and had my own company and was a CEO member of a group and in the Bay Area. And since then, I've sold the company and went on and eventually was really recruited by Vistage to start a couple of new groups in the Bay Area, and 11 years ago. And since then, I've grown those, and also now I'm what they call the best practice chair, meaning all the chairs in the Bay Area get together, about 21 of us, and we all get together once a month, and we help each other. How can we be better at what we're doing? How can we sharpen our saw? So that's, in a nutshell, that's really what Vistage is and what Vistage chairs are.
Awesome. So it's like sometimes it's like State of the Union conversations. Sometimes it's about like having conversations about how we could take the wisdom from this generation and impart it on the next two generations. Because I've seen some stumbling blocks for the next two generations about, struggling with leadership, that type of thing. And I think it comes down to being overparented. I think in 1988, America's Most Wanted changed parenting. And then we pulled kids in off the street. So, just from a functional perspective, from a psychological one, children have to have unsupervised play with other children in order to actually learn how to become an adult. So I think there's a lot of people in these next two generations that are kind of running around in adult bodies, but aren't actual adults, and therefore struggle to lead. Now, this isn't like, the next generation is terrible. Like, it's not that old trope. What I'm talking about is from an opportunity and from a threat perspective, because more companies are going to change hands in the next 15 years than ever before in American history. So that's both a threat and an opportunity. For those young people, like less gray hair than me, that can lead, it's a massive opportunity for them to gobble up competition and become the retirement plan. In fact, I was just talking to a company out of Denver that they saw the same trend that I did 16 years ago, created an acquisition company just for mom and pop insurance companies, like the one likely on your street corner. Mm-hmm. So they've acquired 500 of them, and they're now a $3 billion organization with $1 billion in EBITDA, on their way to going public. Unbelievable. Wow. So those are the type of opportunities we have.
Yeah, that's interesting, because so many people I've seen along the lines of what you're talking about, it can be any generation, have a fantastic idea, and they figure out how to get this idea generating revenue for them some way, shape, or form, but they don't necessarily have the business street smarts of running a business. They've just started this new company, or they've got a great idea and they're starting to make money with it. So the really neat thing I've seen working with all these different CEOs over the last 11 years, and then the 7 years I was in before that, is that all these people get an opportunity to come in, share where their weaknesses, what are the areas that, for instance, Stephen Covey says, their people should have, CEOs should have be good in 4 areas. 1 is the financials. 2, they've got to be able to wave the flag of the company, go out on podcasts like this, whatever it may be, and wave the flag. 3, they're typically the best salesperson in the company. And 4, they've got to be great at culture and manage that culture. And if they can handle all 4 of those things, then they're going to be a great CEO. And just about everybody in my group is great at 1 or 2 of those things, but maybe not all 4 of it. So here they get an opportunity, and we like to have people as diverse as possible, diverse in gender, race, business, and as much diversity as possible. So we get as many different ideas thrown into the mix and stirred around. And when somebody brings an issue or opportunity to the group, they're getting a fantastic set of options that they can then pick and choose from.
To me, the genius really is in Vistage is the issue processing. So picture it's like, so Mike, it goes like this. Let's say you're up against something. Carl's the facilitator, and I'm just one of the CEOs in the room, right? So there's maybe 12 of me. There's 1 of you, 1 of Carl. So Carl instructs you that you outline whatever challenge you're up against, and then to tell us how important it is. And then that gives us time. Now, what he's also trying to do is make sure that people like me don't just come up with a solution too soon, because the outline, the issue that you're outlining might not be the real issue. There might be something buried beneath that. That's the real issue that you may or may not even know. So what it does from an evolutionary psychology perspective is, we're hardwired to jump to conclusions. And basically because it helped our ancestors survive in the wild. Like, better we recoil from a curly stick in the jungle and be embarrassed it's not a snake than to be standing over it, like looking through a manual going, is that the poisonous kind? Because you're dead.
Sounds like politics to a certain if you smoke a conclusion about somebody because they have a D or an R next to the name, or they come from a certain part of the country or a certain part of the state. And I guess that also translates over into business and the challenges that business owners have.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is because we're emotional about our own issues. And frankly, every human being has a blind spot. We have stereoscopic vision, so we can't see the back of our own heads like, fish can or what have you. So what that does, that means that we're missing something. And that's what I found in my travels last 16 years analyzing these guys, is every single company has a blind spot. It's probably the thing they very much suck at. Because there seems to be a connection between what I'm ignoring and what I suck at. So then the other CEOs in the room, or CEOs in this case, sometimes it's key members, they bring a different perspective because they're not emotionally attached to your issue. Then what they do is they get to ask very specific questions in the Q&A, and you get to talk. Then what happens is, no, you don't get to talk anymore. You have to sit in silence while the rest of the people talk behind your back in front of your face. And it kind of like, this is what I would do. This is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that, da, 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 da. And the person who's listening can only listen. So I can't write stuff.
Or write something down if they hear something they like.
And we've talked about this before in previous episodes, but I find, and maybe Carl, you haven't found it with your group, a major blind spot with CEOs, whether it's a publicly traded company or not, is communication. They kind of group their comms efforts under marketing. They group their comms efforts on, okay, if we have a crisis, we'll engage somebody, when they don't realize necessarily that whether you're a trucking business or interior designers or manufacturers. If you're not communicating, if you're not prepared for those emergencies or for the times when there's a change in the market, perhaps your competitor screwed up and now your entire industry is under the microscope and you're not prepared for that, it will affect your bottom line one way or another. So that's just with my background and what I focus on. I know Mark will say, you always talk about it that way. Yeah, I do, because that's what I do for a living. The political position I hold is on the side of what I do for a living with communications consulting.
That's a really good point. And I think when people, when something happens, like you're talking about, devastating to your industry, and it's having a ripple effect on yours, sometimes, we go into fight or flight mode and we hunker down and we say, okay, I'm just got to be defensive on this thing. And you're not necessarily thinking, how can I, you're not thinking clearly on how you can maybe handle it. So that's another nice thing about having the Vistage Group, is that all of a sudden you're taking a day in the middle of this hectic situation you're going through. You're taking a day to get with your peers, and all of a sudden they might come up with I always say they come up with all these crazy ideas because they're not necessarily in my business. The next day I get up and I get in the shower and I'm thinking in the shower, that's not such a dumb idea after all. That's a pretty darn good idea. In fact, if we did that, we might upset the industry somehow. And so, yeah, that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head on that one.
I've heard this as a kind of a rumor in innovation circles, from the innovative speakers, is that all innovation comes external to an industry. It's something worked in this industry. It's almost like a synthesis of the two. And if I understand it correctly, and especially like the last downturn we experienced, which is, it's always just that next cloud on the horizon, let's call it. It's been 16 years since the last one. We're way overdue. So what ends up happening is, it's all we really have to do is outperform our competitors by about 10%. That's it. So we don't have to be wildly better than everybody else. We just have to perform better than our competitors in the next downturn. So personally, I don't think the next downturn is all that far away, maybe next year or what have you. But the idea here is how do we make them more resilient? We got to expose them to ideas that would make them uncomfortable, creating an ethos of deliberate discomfort. But I'm going to take it down for a bit here. Back to the level of non-Vistage members. Because what I'm thinking is there's absolutely tons of people out there that are interested in owning or running a small business. What would be your opinion, Carl, about how to get started in something like that?
Wow. Well, I guess there's several. By the way, I have to back up for 1 second on before we leave the Vistage. The most important thing I forgot to mention is that we have guest speakers that come in and talk to our groups. And that's how I met Mark, because he is an expert in his field and has come out and I think our group thought he was absolutely the best speaker they've ever heard.
I have to ask, I hear he has certain parts of the country where he's well received and other parts of the country where he's not. I'm not going to say which towns, but just that's a rumor out there.
Yeah, well,
I can tell you I can show you the scores.
He did well with my group, but I think he got pretty beat up with one of the other groups out here in California, because everybody is, different. Everybody has different viewpoints, and I think that's what's so fantastic about Vistage is you get to hear all the different viewpoints. But anyway, I had to start with that, and now I've forgotten what was the question again.
Okay, so picture there's a good portion of people on YouTube that could benefit from the wisdom that we've accumulated over the years just dealing with these guys, right? Mm-hmm. You being one of them yourself. Like myself, I was a member for 5 years and a chair for 5 years. And so I'm one of the few people in the country that's been all three, speaker, member. So it gives me a different vantage point. And, sometimes what happens is, like yourself, the chairs kind of treat me like family by the end of the presentation because they know I know what they're up against.
Yeah.
Having said that, we've got this body of knowledge between there's this other program within the program, Michael. It's called a VCG. It's Vistage Chair Groups. So that, I got to tell you, I miss. That was like the collective wisdom in that room full of chairs. We would meet once a month for best practices, and whatever we were up against, we could process then as an issue with some of the brightest minds in the world. I mean, the collective wisdom in that room was astonishing. Like my very first meeting, Carl, I was the youngest chair in the country at the time, so I knew to shut up. But like my resume was trounced by everybody in that room. So I was, and then every once in a while they'd open up their mouths and drop some wisdom bomb, and I'd be like, "Holy crap! I need to shut up around this person. I need to listen more than speak." But with all that collective wisdom, how can we repackage that for someone, let's say Noah's age, who's in his early 20s, thinking about starting a business? Like how do we translate that wisdom? I've got some ideas.
Or a middle-aged guy like me, well, 42 is middle-aged, but it's a 42-year-old person that has his own business, but obviously would like to grow it somewhat, even though it's too centralized around one individual, me, and how it is that it's such a niche part of the market.
Well, I've got my answers to that. So we could start there, but I don't want to ignore the fact that there's teenagers now that might not even go to college that want to start businesses. And I've seen some really, really impressive businesses built by people that never went to college.
Yeah.
Built by people in like real earthy style business models. So I'm curious about your background, Carlo.
Well, it's interesting. My background is I went to college, got a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, majored in hotel and restaurant management, and I minored in music. I'm actually a drummer, and I still play a lot actively.
That's cool.
And I played in the jazz band and that sort of thing in college. And while I'm at it, I also played at night at the Playboy Club for 2 years straight in Denver, Colorado, the Denver Playboy Club with a band.
Was there a Vistage meeting there? No, right?
No, there was not. Anyway, but we did, I did have a lot of fun thinking back on that. Anyway, got my background in hotel restaurant management, worked in that industry for a number of years, and eventually was recruited to come over to a small company that had hotels and restaurants on a contract basis for the railroad industry, doing about $5 million in revenue a year. And so the railroads have these trains that go from point A to, from say San Francisco to New York, and they stop every couple hundred miles, and they need to stay someplace. And then they get on the next train coming back to San Francisco, and they work their way back from say Reno to San Francisco, et cetera. So we ended up with about 25 lodging facilities around there. And I was like, well, we've got one client, Southern Pacific Railroad, and one service, hotels and restaurants. And if that client ever decides to fire us, the whole business model ceases. So my goal was to try to grow with other railroads. And so eventually I eventually bought out the partners and ended up growing the company with all the different railroads and airlines in the United States, providing a variety of different outsourced services to them, and grew the company to about $100 million in revenue with 3,500 employees, and then sold that company and decided to take a year off, which turned into 7 years. I had drumming and skiing and golfing and some of the things I enjoy doing. And I said, I don't want to just, spend the rest of my life on a golf course. I want to find, something else to do. And about that time, I got in touch with Vistage, and Vistage actually recruited me to become a chair. So I went ahead after that, and that's how I got to be where I am. So in this period of time, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying being with all the Vistage members in the different groups. But I agree with you. I've seen a lot of businesses start out, and I think they need to kind of just be all hands on deck in the beginning when they get up to that $2-3 million range in revenues. And once they get there, then a lot of times they get stuck. And I don't know if that's, kind of where you got Michael or not, but to get to the next level, it's super energizing to meet with other people who are all maybe the same size or bigger even. And you learn, and some smaller too. You can help others and they can help you. And that's how you can end up taking yourself, you're making, I say that they make better decisions because you're actually listening to all these other people who've already done what you are doing now and made a whole bunch of mistakes. And you're about to do something and they go, wait a minute, don't do that. We already did that and made a lot of mistakes. Why don't you do this instead? And if that will save you a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah, and it probably would help, and I'll let Mark jump back in, but it will probably help, especially in an industry like mine that is really feeling the disruption with artificial intelligence and how it is that the push has been. And I was just here in Florida as a city commissioner. We're all invited to the Florida League of Cities, and they had an entire panel session discussion on how it is that AI is changing professional communicators. And they posed it as an assistant. You have a really, really intelligent assistant that happens to be a computer instead of a human. And they basically broke it down as saying before it was a little bit of a luxury. And they said before as if it was 10,000 years ago. It was actually 10 months ago. Mm-hmm. And they said the industry has rapidly changed so much that now you basically need some version of AI to keep up with competitors in the communication space. I know it's not just in comms, but we are feeling it. We're impacting it. So I imagine a Vistage type of setting for folks like me in this space would be a therapeutic, let's just say, the kind of therapeutic and understanding how it is that this disruption needs to be adapted to.
Yeah, there's the thing about if you want to become a better tennis player, you play tennis with better tennis players. That's what I see Vistage as. And I see it as, it's like an ad hoc board of directors for non-publicly traded companies. And therefore it can actually be what boards of directors are supposed to be, but can't be. Because a typical board of directors, maybe in the not-for-profit space, it would work. But in the case of the publicly traded, every single CEO within the first 6 months figures out that the board meeting is a job interview. And they're hired to be fired. Just like a head coach of the Miami Dolphins. I'm just kidding. So the idea back is that what I want to take it down to the lower level. So let's say you got a guy, like there's a guy in Connecticut that was really impressive. This dude, like, he wasn't like physically impressive. Like I didn't sit back and say this is the smartest person I've ever met, what have you, quite the opposite. But he had like a real earthy style business model that he acquired, like snow removal, tree service companies, and then someone approached him about brownfields. So what he did was he said, okay, I'll buy the equipment, I'll pick up the brownfield for 10 cents on the dollar, remediate it, and then turn it into something that can be reused in an environmentally safe way. And then he just kept the properties. So the dude is like, he didn't make it out of high school, and yet he's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $40 million with a residual business model that's never going away. The guy is so resourceful. I was presenting to his Vistage group in a building he built himself with the wood from the tree removal service. So none of it cost him any money. I mean, this dude's like, should be standing next to a globe stroking a long-haired white cat. This is like Bond villain smart. Carl, it gets better. So he sells the
patch over one eye. Or...
the millions, right? So picture he sells the business to a company, and he's got an earnout. So he's sitting in the building in the business, and they hire one of those efficiency experts that figures out the only person that needs to be fired is him. So they fired him. Now, then they come to him and say, okay, we're sorry we had to let you go. We're going to need the keys to the building. He goes, I can't give you that. And they were like, well, why not? I said, because I own the building. So he was their landlord, and they didn't know it. Then all of the licenses that enable those companies to exist are still his. They didn't buy them from him. So they had to take all their clientele and give it back to him and then buy the company back from him a second time.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you tell that to a large enough school of lawyers, and they just crack up about this dude just ate these people's lunch. And meanwhile, it's like all of them went to Ivy League schools and stuff. So part of this is like I would argue for someone like Noah is you find someone that has a challenge. Like you don't build it and hope they'll come. What you do is you find someone with a challenge and then solve the challenge, and then just do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again. Be willing to take serious risks and put money behind something that promises to deliver, so that this way, because you're in it, then we got to get to the point. So now we get to the point where it's like maybe Mike and Mai's business. Then we go to a Vistage. Now we learn how to actually become a true CEO. You know what I mean? Because I don't know about you, Mike, but like my business is so small, like we don't have P&L, we got P. Right. So, and frankly, all the headaches come from employees. Right. So when people have large amounts of employees, they need people who also have large amounts of employees to deal with the romper room aspect that employees bring to the table. Like one of my famous lines in my presentation is, when the HR department's running everything, nothing will be run right, including HR. Well, so the deal is like, how do you kind of overcome that and be able to lead, despite the fact that you have to reinvent yourself at every one of these levels of leadership? At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm definitely, I can definitely speak to having only P and not L, especially when you're a one person shop. But
it's a lot better than having L and no P.
I know some people that do. And my brother, whom Mark knows very well, is also basically a solo operation, although he partners on different projects. But I think sometimes that grants a little bit of freedom, because you are able to jump into different consulting roles from an outsider perspective, and you can gain a lot of intel and learn a lot from the company that you're consulting for, and use that. Basically, they may be your consulting client, but they're actually a good example of where you may want to go within your own consulting business. So it's a two-way street when you're in that line of work.
So I get a story to back that up. So picture one of the members in Orange County, Carl. He pulls me aside and says he wanted to talk to me about estate planning, things like that. And I said, okay. So if he had an unbelievable business model that I've never heard of before. And I don't know about you, we get exposed to a lot of that type of stuff within the Vistage world, but it's amazing how people make money. So what this bank did was he went to Claremont. So, and Claremont's, it's an elite university. So he gets hired by one of the big six accounting firms in the 80s, straight out of Claremont. But in Claremont, they don't teach accountants how to audit. So they found this out the hard way, and they were like, all right, you're useless. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to send you to talk to the CEOs, find out what they need, and then we'll send an accountant that knows what they're doing to do the work that we hired you to do. So it was a little bit pejorative, but it put him in a position where he could study all the other business models. And then what he did was he entered the one he loved the best, which was, it's hard for me to describe it. It's a picture like, industrial areas of your cities, right?
Sure.
And you'll see it's just a warehousing. And the deal is that he and his partners form limited partnerships to buy those properties. And normally they don't have a lot of competition because the interest rate, the rate of return on it is so low. The margins are so tight. The people who are attracted to real estate trusts want to go in a different area, right? So, but he was estimating, this man was estimating that although he was worth like maybe 12 million now, that by the time he dies, it'll be worth 85 million bucks. He can actually project the valuation increase and the growth of it, and knew he would have estate tax challenges. My argument, though, about bringing up the story is there's ways that you can work with people to kind of find out more about these businesses, these niche businesses, and then creating an annuity for yourself. And it's one of the best forms of investment you possibly can do, because if you want to get rich, you got to concentrate your assets. If you want to stay rich, you got to diversify. So what we don't want to do is go into diversification too soon. What teenagers, young 20-year-olds need to do is find old dudes like us. Because there's a thing about old dudes. We're like balloons, right? Well, let me finish, Mike, all right? Because if you're not there, you're going to be there soon, right? So picture, I had open heart surgery 2 years ago, so I think it's officially I'm old, right? So picture, you get an older guy.
So did I, by the way.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's not something to put on your bucket list, Mike. So, but that was like being run over by a freight train. I don't know about yours, Carl.
Yeah, it was.
So picture, you get an older man. Like I did this early on with Vistage. I would take him to lunch, and you ply him with a little liquor, and then you give him the old wise sage one routine. Like tell me how you got to where you are. And old dudes love to espouse the wisdom they've accumulated. So it's like popping a water balloon, just kind of spills out all over the table. Especially if they've done something like Carl's done, where you kick so much butt, you created this monumental company and then sold it successfully. With that type of stuff, that wisdom is worthy of mining. So it's like, can you tell us all about the deal, Carl?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. The crazy thing is, and this is something I was going to mention about Vistage, and when Mike was talking about profits and losses, and everybody in our Vistage group at one point or another, I've seen go through downturns. So, that's normal for businesses. They're going to go up and they're going to go down, and some may not survive going down. And that's why it's great to have a Vistage group, because when they can help you to take off the blinders and think clearly about what is the best next strategic move for you. And that's exactly what happened with me. My business was growing so fast because I was providing these services to the railroad industry. When I started, there were about 30 different Class 1 railroads around the United States. And in the end of the 20 years, there were only 4 left, Class 1 railroads. And so the people I'd worked with were consolidating. And one railroad was buying up all these other railroads and said, we want you to just handle all of our, we also provided shuttle services, kind of like these shuttle buses that take the flight crews to and from the airports you might have seen.
Yep.
They want those for railroad crews too. So we're doing it for the airlines and the railroads. And that business just took off. They used to use taxi services. Eventually we had, brand new vans with, a lot of safety equipment and that sort of thing, custom for them. So anyway, we did that, and that grew, and it was growing so dramatically that I couldn't handle, and we were mostly labor. We were about 35% labor, meaning that every 2 weeks, you got to make a payroll. We had 3,500 employees, and every 2 weeks, you got to pay those guys, even if the railroads want to wait 30, 60, 90 days to pay you. So I ended up at one point where I had, $1 million for payroll every 2 weeks. And I had a couple of times where I couldn't make payroll. And, what do you do? I don't look good in an orange jumpsuit, and if you don't make payroll or you don't make your payroll taxes, the government will have something to say about that. So I managed to borrow the money and keep it going and pay it back. And but in the meantime, the banks are saying, hey, your debt to equity ratio is getting upside down. The profitability wasn't there yet. We were putting all this money out to grow with the railroads as they're expanding. And I found, it was an incredibly stressful time in my life. I wasn't sure I was going to make payroll every 2 weeks. And I had the railroads saying, can you handle that? And we go, yeah, we can handle that. Now I go back to my office and go, how are we going to handle that? So, again, that was a good time to have the Vistage group, because I went back to the Vistage group and I said, I've got to figure out how to finance this growth. And they said, you realize that if you stop shuttling these railroad crews to the trains aren't going to run. So you have leverage. And they said, why don't you go back to the railroad and ask them to finance your growth? they're asking you to grow.
It was cheap.
And so I didn't really want to do that. I was nervous. It would be like going to your best client and asking him for a loan. But I did it anyway, because at this point I didn't have any choice. And I asked them, and I told them basically, this is the option. Do you want us to have an interruption in service for you? Or do you want us to do an excellent job? And so we ended up partnering with the railroads, and we went on a conference call every week with all their top vice presidents and general managers and everybody down to the roadmasters and all the different levels. And we would have these calls with them, so that we ended up partnering with them, because by this time they had loaned us several $1 million to get this thing off the ground. And they capitalized my growth. So I was able to retain 100% ownership of the company right up until we finally sold it. And in the meantime, somebody else saw that saw our vehicles driving around. They had these, signs on them, and they called me up and asked if I wanted to sell. So I was, well, I don't know, maybe. And then all of a sudden, this situation of growth came along, and I was upside down on a few things. And meantime, the bank is asking for a personal guarantee, and then they wanted a second mortgage on my house. And my wife, ex-wife at the time, was not too pleased with that, and we ended up eventually getting a divorce. So it was a stressful time. But ultimately, I did end up selling to these people that had reached out to me. And from what I've learned in Vistage now, and you don't necessarily want to just take the first person that comes along. However, my Vistage group suggested that I bring in a guy to negotiate this for me. And they said, Carl, you're good, but this guy, get an expert that's done this before. You're probably not that good, actually. And this guy is an expert, so bring him in. So I paid a guy from Ernst & Young who, by the hour, so I didn't have to give him a piece of the deal. And he renegotiated the deal for me, and we ended up with about double of what the initial offer was.
Wow, so
Which made me very happy. It was a 6.5 multiple of earnings. And that's pretty darn good for a service company.
Yep.
And so, it all worked out really well in the end. I got that money. And my best story, as long as you're asking on this, the best story I got is the bank that was asking for a second mortgage on my house. The president of the bank would invite me to his house for a Christmas party every year, a holiday party. And so I was up at his holiday party, and after we'd sold sold the company, and he said, Carl, very nice to have you up here. And by the way, I'd love to have my trust group talk to you about maybe helping you invest some of the money. And I said, well, I'd like to do that, but if I did, I'd have to have a second mortgage on your house. And he had looked around and, oh, yes, that's a joke. Yes, oh, I got it. Oh, okay. That was my kind of touche.
Yeah, you're.
I have to ask both of you something.
Yeah.
Do you find, and I don't know how much interaction you have with the generation just after yours of business leaders, but maybe for the Noahs and those types of folks, do you find an attitude that is, let's say, negative towards having to take on debt to start businesses? And it's why that rang in my head when Carl was talking about meeting payroll every 2 weeks, especially a payroll that large. I also am an adjunct. I'm not a full professor, nor do I want to be, but an adjunct professor at a university that I graduated from in Miami. And I find that a lot of students would love to be as successful as a Carl or a Mark, but they don't necessarily have an appetite to sometimes take on a significant amount of debt. I don't know if that's some of my generation and the one after me because of what we lived through. And talk about psychology, which Mark always does. It's imprinted on our minds. I know it was 16 years ago, but when we were coming of age, coming out of college or turning 18, depending upon where you landed in that millennial cycle, we experienced 9/11, then we experienced a financial downturn in 2008. We are due for another one, whether it's the end of this year or Q1 or two next year. So do you find that in younger folks that want to build businesses that there's just not much of an appetite for saying, I have to take on investors, I have to take on some debt in order to build a company and then eventually make it profitable and successful and hopefully be like Carl and sell it?
You want to take that one, Carl?
Yeah, well, I've seen actually quite a few people in our groups that are willing to take on investors. And they talk about that, and they would maybe prefer to do that even than debt. And in my case, it really paid off to do the debt. I knew my business, and I knew it pretty well. I knew we could make money. And so I was not as worried about the debt. Sure, I mean, you stay up at night when you've got a big payroll and things are turning upside down. But when things are just kind of humming along, a little, the debt was not necessarily a worry for me. I do see a bit of a hesitancy for younger people on the debt, and I do see a lot of them diving into equity. They feel that taking on investors, and I don't necessarily approve of that as much. I try to discourage it. If people want to do it, I mean, and if somebody joins my business group and they want to do equity and raise equity and they know what they're doing, great. But if they want to have a discussion about it, I would open that discussion to our group. And I will even share my feeling on it because I've been through that. If there's a lot of issues with equity, because then you have to evaluate the company every year and figure out what's it worth. And almost every time you're going to disappoint somebody, Now you're trying to give them equity so that they can be happy, and you're trying to get the money so that you can do great things. And, and it turns out people are usually unhappy. Or also if you give equity or sell equity to employees, they could be happy if it works out well, if you give them a smoking deal, but it has to be a pretty consistent formula to appraise your company every year and to follow some formula of valuation, or else it isn't. It's a little bit more challenging. So in my case, what I did is I said, I will profit share. So I wanted to incentivize some of my top people. So I gave them a percentage of the net profit, and also a percentage of when we sold, because I brought in a very high-powered executive team, and I said, I'm going to give you all, 3 or 4 or 5% profit and of when we sell, and in lieu of a stock. And they were happy with that. And in the end, when we sold, they got a percentage of the net sale price. So we had to pay off all our debt service. But whatever pot of gold was left over, I split that with them in a proportional amount that we'd already set up. And they were tickled pink. It was just sort of like icing on the cake. They didn't really even expect to get that much. That's what I lean towards. But I mean, they both can be good. But
can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
I got a story for you in South Florida. So I'm presenting in West Palm Beach, and the chair comes up to me. Now this is very unusual. The part for me is not unusual. The part for the member is unusual. So I got to jump. My presentation's over at noon. I got a flight out of PBI. And I got to drive across town in a minivan or whatever I was renting at that time. And so the chair turned to me and said that one of his members who had just sold and was very germane to the presentation needed a ride to the airport. He goes, "Can you give him a ride?" I said, No sweat. So we jumped in the car, and he said, now at that time I was still doing my first assessment, my first survey, where 87.7% of Vistage members reported trouble sleeping at night. In fact, there's a very famous chair in Chicago that kind of scoffed when I said that out loud when I presented for him the first time. I said 87.7% of the membership report trouble sleeping at night for those things you're talking about, Carl. Because owning a business is like having a bad girlfriend or a bad boyfriend. Treats you great in the good days and like a 4-letter word in the bad days. It just does. So part of Vistage is how do we tame it and turn it into something you can marry for the long haul, right? So picture the guy gets in the car with me and he goes, Mark, I just sold, and he sold out for a real nice number. It was software for healthcare. So it was killer business. It's the highest valuation out there. It's got demographics going for him, all that type of stuff. And when his non-compete is up, so the higher ups at the company turned to him and said, you want to do it again? Because they had such a good experience on the exit. They said, let's go build another one because now we can. And he's reluctant. And I said to him, well, why are you reluctant? He said, because of that statistic you put out there. He said there wasn't a single day that he was running that company, which he ran for 10 years, where he didn't experience one moment of terror on any single day. So it's kind of like, so part of this is it's like, do you really want to do this? Because it's not for everybody. There's a reason why there's so few people who are successful. Like a chair I was just interviewing for my next book gave me a statistic yesterday that less than 4% of all companies even make it past $1 million. And it's 0.04 that make it past that 2.33 million number you were talking about earlier, Carl. You said they tend to get stuck. I'm like, that's an abysmal number. And my argument is that there's 600,000 potential members. Now, I did this study with Hoover's 15 years ago. There's 600,000 potential members in the United States for Vistage, meaning like north of like 5 million in revenue. So, but only 20,000 or so, like I call it a unique member, Carl. It's like, you got the key member, the CIO, the COO, and the CEO as members. That's one company. That's what I would call that. So there's about 20,000. It's just an estimate on my part. I don't know the top of my head. I'm working off some old rumors I've heard.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I think it's a fair enough number. So it's about 20,000 members. There's 600,000 potential. So how many of them can kind of get over their own ego and then recognize, oh, you can't separate out the business owner from the business. So it's what, if I grow personally, the business grows. Usually like when they first become members, they're kind of pointing the fingers in the wrong direction. And then like the finger has to kind of go like this. It's like, oh, and those are the best members as far as I'm concerned. It takes a while. It's not for everybody,
Boy, you hit the nail on the head. In fact, I think everybody in our group at some point does that, including me. One of the great things I think that one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing now is that I'm learning every day. It's so much fun to learn and it's also fun to not have that $1 million for payroll every 2 weeks.
Like last one to touch it.
Well, I do enjoy learning all the time, and when you start pointing the fingers, at some point you have to come back and point them at yourself and figure out, how can I be the best?
Well, I think that's the linchpin in all of it. I think that's the linchpin in all of it. Like, so one of the few things I would take umbrage with Vistage about is their slogan. Better leaders, better decisions, better results. I think it's better decisions, better leaders, better results. So it's all about like, what's this decision process that we're actually going into? And are we really pointing the energies of the organization in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
Listen, Carl, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your wisdom. Let's do that soon, okay?
Thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. And Mark, I love having you out, and we're going to get you back out to speak to our group again, because you were definitely sensational, and all my groups are talking about.
Just so you know, Carl, because we have a bet. And after my Dolphins kick his Jets asses twice this year, he's got to do a Vistage speaking engagement with a Miami Dolphins jersey on.
Oh, man. Oh, I don't remember agreeing to that. Okay.
What we all ought to do is have another conversation sometime after the 49ers win the Super Bowl.
They're close. They're close.
Yeah. It's been close twice. And, there's one last thing I would say to you, Carl, is something I'm offering to chairs is once I'm done with my old assessment, my old survey, it'll probably be about 4 months. but I'm going to be able to tell Vistage how valuable it is to be a Vistage member in dollar figures.
Wow.
Now, I discovered, like, I wasn't sharp enough back then to write down every chair and every group. Some of the chairs did. So now what I can do with that information is I can value each one of those companies with a little help from the chair, because I got to figure out which industry they're in. They got to help me because the surveys were anonymous. But if the chair is willing to participate, I'm going to be able to track the performance of their members over time. And I'll be able to tell each of the chairs how valuable it is to be their member.
Oh, that's great.
Dollar figures.
That would be fantastic. And, it's interesting because I always, every year when I was a member, I would review back and say, am I getting the return on investment of my time and my money? And of course, when I sold the company for double what they'd originally offered, and I got a 6.5 multiple, I figured I paid for my Vistage dues about 100 times over.
Without a doubt. Listen, I've got to jump. I've got a hard stop. Thanks so much for your time, guys.
My pleasure. Thank you.